The morning of Leo's 6th birthday began not with a hug, but with the rhythmic, metallic clinking of knitting needles. Eleanor Sterling sat in her sun-drenched breakfast nook in Oak Park, her fingers moving with a grace that only 50 years of practice could bestow. The wool was a soft sky-blue cashmere, the exact color of her grandson's eyes. Eleanor wasn't a woman of grand gestures. She was a woman of stitches, of slow-cooked stews, and of silent observations. At 68, she looked like what the world expected a grandmother to look like. Silver hair kept in a neat bob, comfortable linen dresses, and a face lined with the maps of 1,000 smiles and a fair share of secret sorrows. To the neighbors, she was the lady who grew the best heirloom tomatoes in the county. To the business world of Chicago, she was a ghost, the legendary founder of Sterling Mines who had stepped into the shadows a decade ago to let the next generation lead. But to her daughter-in-law, Tiffany, she was simply the relic. Eleanor finished the last stitch on the sweater, a small embroidered lion on the chest, Leo's favorite animal, and tucked it into a vintage, recycled paper box. She didn't need a designer bag to carry it. The value, she believed, was inside. "Julian, honey," Eleanor whispered to the framed photo of her son on the mantel, "I hope you remember that some things can't be bought at Nordstrom." The drive to the Vance estate, as Tiffany insisted on calling their new North Shore mansion, took nearly an hour. As Eleanor pulled her 10-year-old Subaru into the cobblestone driveway, she felt like a pebble in a sea of Ferraris and Range Rovers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the artificial cheer of a high society event. This wasn't a child's birthday party. It was a networking gala disguised with a few balloons. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of organic kale smoothies and champagne flutes. Eleanor smoothed out her dress, a classic black silk shift she'd owned since 1995. It was timeless, high quality, and understated. But as she approached the towering mahogany front doors, the door swung open, and there stood Tiffany. Tiffany Vance Sterling was 34, but her face was so taut from preventative procedures that she struggled to show genuine emotion. She was draped in a cream-colored jumpsuit that cost more than Eleanor's first car. Her eyes immediately raked over Eleanor, landing on the Subaru and then the recycled gift box. "Eleanor," Tiffany said, her voice dropping an octave to hide her irritation from the guests behind her. "I thought I told Julian the party started at 4. It's 4:30. The VIPs are already settled in the atrium." "The traffic on the I-94 was a bear, Tiffany. Happy birthday to our boy," Eleanor said, reaching out to hug her. Tiffany stepped back as if Eleanor were carrying a contagious fever. "Don't. I just had this steamed. And Eleanor, that dress, is that the same one you wore to our wedding? It's retro, not in a good way." "It's silk, dear. It lasts," Eleanor replied calmly, though a small spark of heat rose in her chest. "Just stay in the periphery, okay? My boss from the marketing firm is here, and I told him you were eccentric, not antique. Go through the kitchen. The staff will show you where the family table is. It's tucked away near the garden exit. Better airflow for someone your age." Eleanor felt the first sting. She wasn't being welcomed as the matriarch. She was being hidden like a stained rug. Inside, the house was cold. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom for an interior designer who hated children. There were no finger paints on the walls, no stray Legos. Even the playroom looked like a museum exhibit. Eleanor found Julian near the bar. He looked exhausted, the skin under his eyes gray. When he saw his mother, a flash of genuine relief crossed his face, but he quickly checked over his shoulder for Tiffany. "Mom, you made it," Julian said, kissing her cheek. "I wouldn't miss Leo's day for the world, Julian. You look tired, son. Are you eating?" "Tiffany has us on a new macronutrient plan. It's intense," Julian sighed. He looked at the gift box. "Is that the sweater? Mom, you shouldn't have. Tiffany bought him a motorized mini Tesla. She thinks handmade gifts look cluttered in his closet." "A child needs warmth, Julian, not just batteries," Eleanor said firmly. Before Julian could respond, a shrill cry erupted from the center of the room. It was Leo. The boy had been forced into a miniature tuxedo that clearly itched. When he saw Eleanor, his face transformed. "Grandma Elle!" he screamed, dodging a waiter to throw himself at her knees. Eleanor knelt, ignoring the creak in her joints, and pulled him into a crushing hug. For a moment, the plastic world of the Vance estate vanished. "Happy birthday, my little lion," I have something for you." But as Eleanor reached for the box, Tiffany appeared like a shadow. "Leo, honey, don't scream. You're upsetting the atmosphere," Tiffany said, her hand gripping the boy's shoulder a bit too tight. "And Eleanor, put that box away. We're doing the unboxing segment for my Instagram Live in 10 minutes. We only show the curated gifts. Put it on the side table in the hall, the one with the crystal." Eleanor watched as her grandson was led away like a prop for a photo shoot. She walked to the hall, her heart heavy. On the side table sat Tiffany's Patek Philippe watch, carelessly tossed next to a vase of lilies, a $50,000 piece of jewelry treated like junk because Tiffany had so much of it. Eleanor placed her sky blue box next to it and turned to head toward the kitchen as ordered. She just wanted a glass of water and a moment to breathe. 10 minutes later, the silence of the house was shattered. "Where is it? Who took it?" Tiffany's voice shrieked through the atrium, cutting off the soft jazz music. Eleanor hurried back into the hall to find a circle of guests whispering. Tiffany stood by the side table, her face flushed a blotchy red. The crystal vase was there. The sky blue box was there. The watch was gone. Tiffany's eyes darted around the room, landing on Eleanor, who was standing near the kitchen entrance. A wicked, calculated light flickered in Tiffany's gaze. She didn't just want her watch. She wanted Eleanor gone, permanently. "Eleanor," Tiffany said, her voice trembling with a fake theatrical hurt. "You were the last one by this table. I saw you putting your box right here." Eleanor frowned. "I was, Tiffany. I put my gift down and went to get water." "Julian, look!" Tiffany pointed at Eleanor's vintage black handbag. "That bag is bulging. Mother Sterling, I know you've been complaining about your fixed income and how the world is getting too expensive. But to take my watch? At your grandson's party?" The room went deathly silent. Julian stepped forward, his face pale. "Tiffany, stop. That's ridiculous. Mom would never—" "Then why won't she open the bag, Julian?" Tiffany stepped closer to Eleanor, her voice loud enough for every socialite in Chicago to hear. "She's been bitter all day. Bitter about my dress, bitter about my house. She thinks she's better than us because she's old school. Well, old school evidently means shoplifter now." "Tiffany, you are crossed a line," Eleanor said, her voice low and dangerous. "I did not touch your watch." "Search her!" a voice called out from the crowd, one of Tiffany's climbing friends. "I'm not searching my mother," Julian snapped, but his voice lacked the steel a mother needs from a son. He looked at Eleanor with a pleading expression. "Mom, just show her the bag so we can get back to the party. Please, for Leo." Eleanor looked at her son. This was the boy she had raised on stories of knights and honor. This was the man she had worked 3 jobs for in the early days of Sterling Mines, so he could have the best education. And here he was, asking her to submit to a humiliation just to keep the peace with a bully. "No," Eleanor said. "See?" Tiffany cried. "She's hiding it! She's a thief! Security!" 2 hired guards in suits stepped forward. They looked uncomfortable. They were trained to handle drunk guests, not grandmothers. "Get this pauper away from my table," Tiffany hissed, her face inches from Eleanor's. "You've always been a stain on this family's reputation. You dress like a maid, you act like a martyr, and now you steal from the hand that feeds your son. Get out of my house, Eleanor, and don't you ever think you're coming near my son again. I won't have a criminal influencing Leo." Eleanor stood her ground as the guards took her arms. She didn't struggle. She didn't scream. She looked past Tiffany, straight at Julian. "Julian," she said, her voice steady, "are you going to let this happen?" Julian looked at the floor. He looked at the guests. He looked at Tiffany's rage. "Mom, maybe you should just go. We'll talk tomorrow when things calm down." That was the twist of the knife. Not the daughter-in-law's cruelty, but the son's silence. As the guards escorted Eleanor toward the door, Tiffany reached over and grabbed the sky blue gift box. "And take your trash with you," Tiffany yelled, tossing the box at Eleanor's feet. The lid popped open, and the sky blue sweater fell onto the wet cobblestones of the driveway, as it had begun to rain. Eleanor picked up the sweater, now stained with muddy water. She didn't cry until she was safely inside her old Subaru. She sat there, clutching the damp wool to her chest, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and happy birthday coming from the mansion. She looked in the rearview mirror. Her silver hair was mussed, her eyes were red, and she looked every bit the broken old woman Tiffany wanted her to be. But then Eleanor reached into her handbag. She pulled out her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call Julian. She opened a secure app, the internal portal for Sterling Mines Global. She scrolled through the recent acquisitions folder. There it was, Apex Learning Solutions. She clicked on the employee roster for the marketing department. Name, Tiffany Vance Sterling. Position, Senior Brand Manager, probationary. Reporting, to Regional Director. Eleanor's eyes turned from sky blue to the color of a winter storm. You want to play security, Tiffany? Eleanor whispered, her voice no longer trembling. Tomorrow, I'll show you what real security looks like. She put the Subaru in gear and drove away, leaving the Vance estate in her rearview mirror. The lion on the sweater might have been stained, but the woman who made it was about to roar. The rain didn't stop that night. It drummed against the roof of Eleanor's modest home like 1,000 accusing fingers. Inside, the house was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Eleanor sat at her mahogany desk, the same desk where she had signed the incorporation papers for Sterling Mines 35 years ago. She looked at the sky blue sweater, now washed and hanging to dry. The mud was gone, but the fibers felt different. Shaken, just like her. For years, Eleanor had played the part of the retired grandmother because she wanted Julian to have a normal life, free from the shadow of her success. She wanted him to be a man who stood on his own feet. But tonight, she realized that her silence had created a vacuum, and Tiffany Vance had filled it with poison. You think I'm a relic, Tiffany, Eleanor whispered, her eyes reflecting the cold blue light of her laptop screen. You think the world belongs to the loud and the young, but the foundations of this world were built by people you've forgotten how to see. Eleanor didn't call the board of directors. Not yet. If she walked into Apex Learning as the CEO, Tiffany would put on her mask. She would cry, she would lie, and she would manipulate Julian into believing his mother was a vindictive tyrant. To truly dismantle a woman like Tiffany, Eleanor had to see the rot from the inside. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Arthur? It's Eleanor Sterling. I need a favor. No, not a merger. I need a blue jumpsuit, a mop bucket, and a temporary security clearance for the night shift at Apex Learning. And Arthur, not a word to my son. Monday morning at Apex Learning Solutions was a whirlwind of caffeine and anxiety. Located in a sleek glass tower in Chicago's Loop, the office was a temple to modern productivity. Open floor plans, neon signs with slogans like "Hustle Harder," and a workforce that looked like they hadn't seen a birthday over 40 in a decade. Tiffany Vance strutted through the glass doors at 8:45 a.m., her heels clicking like a metronome of self-importance. She was wearing a power suit in a shade of aggressive fuchsia, her hair pulled back into a ponytail so tight it looked painful. "Sarah!" Tiffany barked at her young assistant. "Where is the deck for the Silver Years campaign? The Sterling Mines executives are coming for a preliminary review on Friday. If this isn't perfect, your internship isn't the only thing that's ending." The young girl, barely 22, scrambled to hand over a tablet. It's ready, Tiffany. But Marcus, the senior designer, had some concerns about the imagery. He thought it felt a bit stereotypical. Tiffany rolled her eyes, not even looking at the girl. Marcus is 61. His idea of modern is a rotary phone. Tell him to do what I asked or find a hobby. I don't pay for concerns. I pay for execution. From the corner of the break room, a woman in a baggy navy blue jumpsuit watched through the reflection of a vending machine glass. Her silver hair was tucked tightly under a nondescript baseball cap. A heavy pair of non-prescription glasses sat on her nose, and a surgical mask, common enough in a post-pandemic world, covered the rest of her face. It was Eleanor. To the high-powered marketers of Apex, she was invisible. She was the cleaning lady. She was the person who emptied the trash bins while they discussed million-dollar budgets. She was a ghost in their machine. For 3 days, Eleanor worked the 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift. She scrubbed floors, wiped down glass partitions, and listened. She listened as Tiffany sat in her corner office, bragging to her friends on the phone about how she had finally dealt with her mother-in-law. Honestly, girl, Tiffany laughed, her voice carrying through the thin ventilation. It was like taking candy from a baby. Julian was so embarrassed he could barely look at her. I told him her dementia is clearly progressing. We're looking into luxury facilities. You know, the ones with high fences. I need her out of our hair before Leo starts asking too many questions. Eleanor's hand tightened around the handle of her mop until her knuckles turned white. Dementia, the cruelty was calculated. If Tiffany could convince Julian his mother was losing her mind, any truth Eleanor told would be dismissed as a hallucination. But the corporate rot went deeper. Later that afternoon, Eleanor was emptying the shredder bin in the creative department when she saw Marcus, the senior designer Tiffany had mocked earlier. He was sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. On his screen was a brilliant, nuanced campaign for lifelong learning, a project designed to help seniors pivot into new careers. It was soulful. It was innovative. It was exactly what Sterling Minds stood for. Tiffany walked in, leaning over Marcus's shoulder with a sneer. "What is this, Marcus? This looks like a documentary. It's boring. Where are the bright colors? Where's the go-getter energy?" "Tiffany," Marcus said, his voice weary. "The demographic we're targeting, people like Eleanor Sterling actually, they don't want to be shouted at. They want to be understood. They have wisdom, not just energy." "Wisdom doesn't sell subscriptions," Tiffany snapped. "I've already rewritten the copy. Here." She dropped a folder on his desk. Eleanor watched from the shadows. As soon as Tiffany left, Marcus opened the folder. His face fell. This is plagiarism," he whispered to himself. Eleanor moved closer, pretending to dust a nearby shelf. She saw the contents. Tiffany had stolen a campaign from a small boutique agency in London and was claiming it as her own. She was even planning to charge Sterling Minds a creation fee for work she hadn't touched. Tiffany wasn't just a bad daughter-in-law. She was a parasite, feeding off the talent of the people she claimed were too old to matter, while simultaneously robbing the company Eleanor had built with her own sweat and tears. The climax of the week came on Wednesday evening. The office was mostly empty, save for Tiffany, who was staying late to polish her stolen presentation, and Eleanor, who was buffing the floors in the executive hallway. Tiffany stepped out of her office, her phone pressed to her ear. She was shouting at Julian. "I don't care if she's lonely, Julian. Your mother is a thief. Have you forgotten the watch? I had to file a police report just for the insurance. If she calls you again, you tell her that if she steps foot on our property, I'm calling the cops. I have Leo's safety to think about." Julian's voice was muffled, but Eleanor could hear the pain in it. "Tiff, she's my mother. She's never even taken a grape from a grocery store without paying. Are you sure you didn't just misplace it?" "Are you calling me a liar?" Tiffany screamed, stopping right in front of Eleanor. She didn't even notice the cleaning lady. She kicked Eleanor's yellow caution wet floor sign out of the way. "I am your wife. I am the mother of your son. Choose, Julian. Choose right now. Her or us." There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Tiffany smirked. "That's what I thought. I'll be home late. Don't wait up." She hung up and looked down at Eleanor, who was standing still, mop in hand. "What are you looking at, Grandma?" Tiffany hissed, her eyes darting over Eleanor's jumpsuit. "Don't you have some toilets to scrub? You're getting water near my Prada loafers. Move." Eleanor didn't move. She looked Tiffany straight in the eyes through her thick glasses. For a split second, something in Eleanor's gaze, a flicker of cold, commanding steel, made Tiffany flinch. "I asked you a question, you old bat," Tiffany said, her voice wavering slightly. "Do you even speak English? Or are you as slow in the head as you are with that mop?" Eleanor lowered the surgical mask. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. "I speak many languages, Tiffany, but I find that honesty is the one you understand the least." Tiffany froze. The voice. It was familiar. She squinted, looking past the baggy clothes and the cap. "No," Tiffany whispered, her face turning a sickly shade of white. "No, that's impossible. Eleanor?" Eleanor took off the cap, letting her silver bob fall free. She stood tall, her posture shifting from the slumped shoulders of a laborer to the regal authority of a CEO. "You called me a pauper at your table," Eleanor said, her voice echoing in the empty glass-walled hallway. "You called me a thief in front of my son. And here, in my company, you call your colleagues dinosaurs while you steal their hard work." Tiffany took a step back, her heels skidding on the damp floor. Your company? What are you talking about? You're a gardener. You're a nobody." "Apex Learning is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Minds Global," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "I founded Sterling Minds in a garage while you were still in diapers, Tiffany. I am the chairperson of the board. I am the woman who signs the checks that pay for those Prada loafers you're so worried about." Tiffany's mind raced. She looked around the empty office, looking for a way to twist this. You spied on me. This is entrapment. I'll sue. I'll tell Julian you've gone completely insane, dressing up like a janitor." "Go ahead," Eleanor said, gesturing to the hidden cameras in the ceiling. "I've spent 3 days recording your management style. I have recordings of you bullying Marcus. I have the metadata of the London campaign you plagiarized, and I have the video from the hall at Leo's party." Tiffany's breath hitched. "What video?" "The crystal vase had a nanny cam hidden in the base, Tiffany. I put it there months ago because I didn't trust the new nanny you hired. I saw everything. I saw you pick up your own watch, slip it into your jumpsuit pocket, and then scream that I had stolen it." Tiffany collapsed against the wall, her lungs struggling for air. The plastic world she had built, the lies, the status, the Vance estate facade, was cracking. "You're fired, Tiffany," Eleanor said, the words falling like heavy stones. "But that's just the beginning. Friday is the board review. You will show up. You will confess your errors to the partners. And then you and I are going to have a very long talk with Julian." "He won't believe you," Tiffany spat, her voice desperate. "He loves me." "He loves the woman he thinks you are," Eleanor countered. "But Julian is a Sterling, and Sterlings have a very low tolerance for those who hurt the people we love." Eleanor picked up her mop bucket. She looked like a cleaning lady again, but the power in the room had shifted so violently that Tiffany felt small, microscopic. "Clean out your desk, Tiffany. You have 10 minutes before security escorts you out. And don't worry about the floor. I've already finished the job." Eleanor turned and walked away, her footsteps steady. She didn't look back at the sobbing woman in the fuchsia suit. Part 2 was over. The infiltration was a success. But Eleanor knew that the hardest part was yet to come. She had to break her son's heart to save his soul. The morning of the board review at Sterling Mines Global was a masterpiece of cold, professional efficiency. The 42nd floor of the Sterling Tower was a sanctuary of glass, brushed steel, and the quiet hum of multi-million-dollar decisions. Outside, the Chicago skyline was gray and forbidding, a fitting backdrop for what was about to unfold. Tiffany Vance Sterling had spent the last 48 hours in a state of manic denial. She had convinced herself that Eleanor was bluffing. An old woman in a janitor's suit? Who would believe her? Tiffany had scrubbed her social media, polished her stolen presentation, and applied a layer of foundation so thick it felt like a ceramic mask. She was a survivor. She was a leader. She walked into the conference room at 10 a.m., her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the titans of the education industry, and there, at the far end, sat the regional directors of Apex Learning. But the leather high-back chair at the head of the table, the chairperson's seat, was empty. "Good morning, everyone," Tiffany said, her voice high and brittle. She projected her stolen London campaign onto the massive 100-inch screen. "Today, we redefine the silver market. We stop treating seniors like grandparents and start treating them like consumers. My team, led by my vision, has developed the Ageless campaign." She began to speak, her words a rehearsed slurry of marketing buzzwords. She talked about disruption, leverage, and synergy. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open. The room went silent. The directors stood up instinctively. Tiffany stopped mid-sentence, her pointer laser trembling on the screen. Eleanor Sterling walked in. She wasn't wearing a blue jumpsuit. She wasn't wearing a 1995 silk shift. She was wearing a bespoke charcoal wool suit that screamed authority. Her silver hair was styled into a sharp, modern cut. Around her neck was a string of black pearls that cost more than Tiffany's suburban home. She didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like a queen returning to her throne. "Please, sit down," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a resonance that made the glass walls vibrate. She didn't even look at Tiffany as she took her seat at the head of the table. "I apologize for my late arrival. I was busy reviewing some internal security protocols." Tiffany's throat went dry. "Mrs. Sterling, I didn't know you were attending the preliminary review." "I attend everything that carries my family's name, Tiffany," Eleanor said, opening a leather-bound folder. "Please continue. You were just explaining the origin of this Ageless campaign. I'm particularly interested in the creative process." Tiffany felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine. Well, as I said, it was a collaborative effort. I spent weeks researching the psychological triggers of the 60-plus demographic. That's strange, Eleanor interrupted, leaning back. Because I have a memo here from a boutique firm in London called West End Creative. They launched this exact campaign 6 months ago for a local charity. Even the font choice, Avenir Next Heavy, is identical. Would you like to explain how your vision managed to replicate theirs down to the pixel? A collective gasp rippled through the room. The Apex directors looked at their feet. They knew. They had always suspected Tiffany's shortcuts, but they had been too afraid of her connections to speak up. I don't know what you're talking about, Tiffany stammered. I've never heard of that firm. This is an attack on my character. Julian told me you were having memory issues, Eleanor. Maybe you're confused. Eleanor's smile was as cold as a surgical blade. My memory is perfect, Tiffany. In fact, I remember the night of Leo's birthday quite clearly. I remember every word you said to me. Eleanor tapped a button on the integrated tablet at her seat. The lights in the room dimmed. Instead of a marketing deck, the 100-inch screen flickered to a grainy, high-definition video feed. It was the hallway of the Vance estate. The board watched in silence as the video played. They saw Tiffany walk to the hall table. They saw her pick up her own Patek Philippe watch. They saw her slip it into the hidden pocket of her cream jumpsuit. They saw her face twist into a smirk. And then they heard her scream, "Security! Get this pauper away from my table!" The video cut to the driveway. They saw the sky blue sweater, the gift Eleanor had knitted with her own hands, being tossed into the mud. They heard Tiffany's voice, sharp as broken glass. "Take your trash with you!" The lights came back up. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Tiffany was frozen, her mouth open in a silent scream. "In 35 years of business," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but lethal, "I have never fired an employee for being a bad person. I hire for talent, and I fire for incompetence. But Tiffany, you have managed to be both. You are a plagiarist who robs your company, and you are a bully who tries to destroy the reputation of an innocent woman to hide your own insecurities." "You can't do this!" Tiffany shrieked, her mask finally shattering. She slammed her hands on the mahogany table. "I'm family! You'll destroy Julian's life. You'll lose your grandson." "Julian is already here," Eleanor said calmly. Tiffany spun around. Standing in the shadows by the oak doors was Julian. He had been there the whole time. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. "Julian," Tiffany whispered, reaching out a hand. "It's not what it looks like. She edited the video. She's trying to separate us." Julian didn't move. He looked at his wife, the woman he had defended against his own mother, and saw a stranger. "I saw the watch in your jewelry box this morning, Tiffany," Julian said, his voice cracking. "I thought you'd found it and forgot to tell me. I wanted to believe you. I wanted so badly to believe that my mother was wrong about you." He stepped into the light, his eyes red-rimmed. "But the way you talked to those people in the kitchen, I heard the recordings Mom made. You called Maria illegal because she has an accent. Maria has been a citizen for 40 years, Tiffany. She lost her son in the Navy. She has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire body." "Julian, please. I did it for us. For our status." "What status?" Julian asked, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "We're living in a house my mother paid for. We're eating food my mother's dividends bought. And you used that wealth to make her feel like garbage. You used my son as a weapon to keep her away." Julian turned to Eleanor. The shame in his eyes was so deep that Eleanor felt a pang of maternal agony. "Mom, I am so sorry. I should have stood up. I should have known." Eleanor stood and walked to her con. She didn't say "I told you so." She simply took his hand. "You were blinded by love, Julian. It's a sterling trait. But now you are seeing with your heart." Eleanor turned her gaze back to the room. "The board has reached a decision. Tiffany Vance Sterling is terminated effective immediately. Her access to all Sterling Mines facilities and accounts is revoked. We will be seeking full restitution for the plagiarized campaign fees." Tiffany looked around the room. The directors, her friends, her allies, all of them were looking away. She was radioactive. "This isn't over," Tiffany hissed, her eyes wild with a desperate, cornered animal rage. "I have Leo. You'll never see him again. I'll move him so far away you'll need a satellite to find him. Actually, Julian said, stepping forward with a piece of paper in his hand. I filed for an emergency temporary custody order an hour ago. Based on your documented history of gaslighting and the police report you falsified against my mother, the judge signed it. You're moving out of the house today, Tiffany. And you're doing it alone. Tiffany slumped into the chair she had once occupied with such arrogance. The plastic crown had melted. She wasn't a CEO in waiting. She wasn't a socialite. She was a woman who had gambled her family for a title and lost both. The fallout from the boardroom reckoning at Sterling Mines Global didn't just break the silence of the executive floor. It shattered the very foundation of the life Tiffany Vance Sterling had meticulously fabricated. When the security guards escorted her out, they didn't just take her badge. They took her dignity, her proximity to power, and the Vance name she had worn like a stolen mink coat. For 48 hours, the Vance estate, the mansion Eleanor had quietly funded, became a tomb of cardboard boxes and hushed phone calls. Julian had moved out with Leo to Eleanor's home in Oak Park, leaving Tiffany alone with her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors she had once posed in for Instagram. But Eleanor knew that women like Tiffany don't just disappear. They don't retreat into the shadows to reflect on their sins. They fester. She's too quiet, Arthur, Eleanor said into her phone, pacing her rose garden in the twilight. Arthur, her head of private security and a friend of 30 years, grunted on the other end. She's been seen at a dive bar near O'Hare, Eleanor. She's meeting with someone. A man named Silas. He's a low-level fixer, the kind people hire when they want to make problems, or people vanish. Do you want me to pick her up? Eleanor looked at the light in her kitchen window, where Julian was teaching Leo how to make sourdough bread. The warmth of the scene was a fragile bubble. No, not yet. We need to see her hand before we call the bet. Just keep eyes on the boy, Arthur. Double the detail. Twist 3. The Desperation of a Ghost. The message came on Wednesday evening, just as the sun was dipping below the Chicago skyline, turning the lake into a sheet of hammered lead. It wasn't a legal threat. It wasn't a plea for alimony. It was a single image sent to Julian's phone. It was a photo of Leo's school cubby. Inside sat his favorite stuffed lion, but the head had been crudely ripped off and replaced with a small plastic crown, the kind Tiffany used as a logo for her influencer brand. Underneath was a text. A Sterling is nothing without an heir. If I don't get the trust, nobody gets the boy. Julian collapsed onto the sofa, the phone clattering to the floor. Mom, she was at the school. Arthur said he had eyes on him, but she must have slipped past. Eleanor picked up the phone, her face turning to stone. She didn't panic. Panic was for the weak. She felt the old, cold fire of the CEO return, the woman who had navigated hostile takeovers and market crashes. She doesn't want the boy, Julian, Eleanor said, her voice a calm, deadly chill. She wants the Sterling Mines Trust. She wants the $2 million I set aside for Leo's education. She's realized that without that money, she's not Tiffany Vance. She's just a failed marketer with a criminal record. Twist 4. The Inheritance of Lies. While Julian was spiraling, Eleanor went back to her study. She pulled out the dossier Arthur had compiled. She hadn't shown Julian everything yet. She had wanted to spare him. But now, the time for mercy was over. She called Tiffany's burner number. It picked up on the first ring. Eleanor, Tiffany hissed, her voice ragged, likely fueled by cheap gin and pure adrenaline. I want the transfer papers. Signed, notarized, by midnight. Or I tell the world, and the police, exactly what your charity work for the custodial staff really is. I'll call it money laundering. I'll ruin the Sterling name before I let you rot in that little garden of yours. Tiffany, Eleanor said, leaning back in her chair, her eyes on a photo of herself at 25, working in that famous garage. You think you're the only one who can reinvent themselves? You think because you changed your last name and got a few injections that you're a new person? What are you talking about? I'm talking about Tiffany Miller from Dayton, Ohio, Eleanor said. There was a sharp, audible intake of breath on the other end. I'm talking about the girl who burned down her parents' convenience store for the insurance money in 2008, Eleanor continued, her voice clinical. The girl who skipped bail and stole the identity of a college roommate. You didn't marry Julian for love, and you didn't even marry him for the lifestyle. You married him because the statute of limitations was running out on your past, and you needed a fortress to hide in. You can't prove that, Tiffany stammered, the bravado cracking like thin ice. I don't need to prove it to a court, Tiffany. I just need to show the evidence to the creditors you've been dodging for a decade. The ones who are currently looking for a woman named Miller. If I release your current address to them, Silas won't be able to protect you. The climax 2 begins. The final meeting, Tiffany went silent for a long time. When she spoke again, the mask was gone. The marketing executive was dead. Only the predator remained. Midnight, the old pier at North Avenue Beach, Tiffany said. Bring the papers for the trust. I don't care about the Miller girl. I care about the money. If I see a cop, Leo's blue sweater will be the only thing the divers find in Lake Michigan. Eleanor hung up. She looked at Julian, who was watching her with terror in his eyes. Is she going to kill him, Mom? No, Eleanor said, standing up and grabbing her coat. Because she knows I'm the only one who can truly make her disappear. But tonight, Julian, you're going to stay here with Arthur's team. I'm going alone. Mom, no! It's a trap. Of course it is, Julian. Eleanor smiled, a grim, beautiful expression. But Tiffany forgot one thing. She thinks she's a predator. She's forgotten that I'm the one who built the jungle. Eleanor arrived at the North Avenue Beach at 11:45 p.m. The wind was a howling banshee, whipping the lake into white-capped furies. The old pier stretched out into the darkness like a skeletal finger. She walked to the end of the pier, a leather briefcase in her hand. The lights of the city were a distant, uncaring glow behind her. I'm here, Tiffany, Eleanor shouted over the roar of the waves. A figure emerged from the shadows of a rusted boat crane. Tiffany was there, clutching a small, bundled shape in a sky-blue sweater. She looked wild, her hair matted by the salt spray. The papers, Tiffany screamed. Drop the briefcase and step back. Eleanor dropped the briefcase, but she didn't step back. She stepped forward. Where is my grandson, Tiffany? Tiffany smirked, holding the blue bundle tighter. He's right here. Say hello to Grandma, Leo. But the bundle didn't move. It didn't cry. Eleanor's heart stopped for a beat. Then she realized the shape was too stiff, too light. Twist 5. The ultimate gamble. It's a decoy, isn't it? Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Leo is safe at home. I checked the cameras before I left. You never got past the security detail at the school. That cubby photo was taken weeks ago when you were still Mommy. You just wanted me here, alone, in the dark. Tiffany laughed, a shrill, haunting sound. She tossed the blue bundle, a wad of towels wrapped in the stolen sweater, into the churning black water of the lake. You're right, Eleanor. I couldn't get the boy. Your guards are too good. But if I can't have the heir, I'll just take the queen. If the great Eleanor Sterling disappears on a cold night at the pier, the company goes to Julian. And Julian? Well, Julian is soft. I can break him in a week. I can make him sign anything. Tiffany pulled a small silver handgun from her pocket. She wasn't an executive anymore. She was the girl from the Ohio fire, ready to burn it all down again. Sign the papers, Eleanor, or the headlines tomorrow will say tragic accident. CEO drowns in midnight walk. Eleanor didn't look at the gun. She looked at the briefcase. You should have opened the briefcase first, Tiffany. Why? Because, Eleanor said, clicking a small remote in her pocket. Suddenly, the pier was flooded with the blinding white light of a dozen high-powered police searchlights. 4 Chicago Police Department boats roared out from under the pier, their sirens wailing. Because the briefcase doesn't have the trust papers, Eleanor said, her voice amplified by the megaphone of a police helicopter that suddenly descended from the clouds. It has a GPS tracker and a live audio link that has been broadcasting your confession of kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder to the district attorney for the last 10 minutes. Tiffany spun around, blinded by the lights, the gun trembling in her hand. She looked like a trapped rat in a spotlight. Drop the weapon, the police shouted over the loudspeakers. Tiffany looked at Eleanor, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You set me up. No, Tiffany, Eleanor said, stepping into the safety of the advancing tactical team. You set yourself up the moment you decided that my family was a business transaction. In this family, we don't just sign checks. We protect our own. As the officers tackled Tiffany to the ground, Eleanor picked up her leather briefcase. She looked out at the dark water where the blue sweater was drifting away. The lion was gone, but the woman was standing taller than ever, 6 months had passed since the night the North Avenue Beach Pier was illuminated by the flashing blue and red lights of the Chicago Police Department. The harsh, biting winds of that October had softened into the gentle, fragrant breeze of a Chicago April. Eleanor Sterling sat in her backyard in Oak Park, her hands deep in the rich, dark soil of her rose garden. She wasn't wearing a designer suit or a janitor's jumpsuit. She wore an old, faded denim apron over a simple cotton shirt. The dirt beneath her fingernails felt more real, more honest than any mahogany boardroom table ever had. "Grandma, look! The ladybugs are back!" Leo came sprinting across the grass, his face glowing with a health that had been missing for years. He was wearing a new sweater, not the sky blue one that had been lost to the lake, but a deep forest green one, knitted with the same steady, loving hands. "That means the garden is healthy, Leo," Eleanor smiled, wiping a smudge of dirt from his forehead. "They protect the flowers from the things that try to eat them from the inside." Julian walked out onto the porch, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He looked younger than he had in a decade. The tension in his jaw, the constant flinch in his eyes whenever a phone rang, it was all gone. He had spent the last few months in intensive therapy, untangling the knots of a 10-year marriage built on gaslighting and shadows. "He's almost done with his science project, Mom," Julian said, handing her a glass. "He wants to show you the model of the solar system he built. He used your old knitting spools for the planets." Eleanor took a sip of the tea, the cold sweetness a perfect contrast to the warmth of the sun. "He has a sterling mind, Julian. He sees value in things others throw away." The final twist, the Miller legacy. Julian sat on the porch steps, his expression turning serious. He pulled a letter from his pocket. It was stamped with the seal of the Illinois Department of Corrections. "I got the final report from the investigators today," Julian said quietly. "About Tiffany, or rather Tiffany Miller, had been sentenced to 12 years in a maximum security facility. The charges were a laundry list of modern sins: aggravated kidnapping, corporate espionage, and a string of identity thefts dating back to 2010. The detectives found a storage unit in her name in Gary, Indiana," Julian continued. "It was filled with the things she took from her previous lives: Social Security cards, birth certificates, and jewelry from 2 other men she had married and abandoned before she ever met me. She wasn't a marketer, Mom. She was a professional ghost." Eleanor looked out at her roses. She wasn't surprised. A woman who could look her own mother-in-law in the eye and call security to have her removed was a woman who had long ago severed her connection to the truth. "She asked for a visit," Julian said, his voice firm. "She told the warden she wanted to explain things to Leo. She said she has a plan for a new business she can run from inside." "And?" Eleanor asked. "I burned the letter," Julian said. "Leo doesn't need an explanation from a ghost. He needs a father who is present and a grandmother who is real. We're moving forward, Mom. No more plastic crowns." The legacy of Sterling Mines. The company had changed too. Eleanor had returned to the office just long enough to oversee a complete cultural overhaul. Marcus, the senior designer Tiffany had tried to destroy, was now the chief creative officer of Sterling Mines Global. He had launched the Legacy Initiative, a program that specifically recruited and mentored professionals over the age of 55. The dinosaurs, as Tiffany had called them, were now the backbone of the most successful educational tech firm in the country. Janet Rodriguez, the custodial supervisor who had been pushed to the night shift, was now the director of facilities. She wasn't just cleaning offices, she was designing them to be spaces of dignity and respect. "We're not just selling software anymore, Julian," Eleanor had told the board during her final meeting before stepping back into her garden. "We're selling the idea that a human being's value doesn't have an expiration date." As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the Oak Park lawn, Leo ran back to Eleanor, clutching a small, jagged piece of plastic he'd found near the fence. It was a fragment of a cheap, gold-painted toy crown, one of the props Tiffany had used for her social media shoots months ago. "Is this treasure, Grandma?" Leo asked, turning the shiny piece over in his small hand. Eleanor took the fragment. In the light of the setting sun, the gold paint was already peeling, revealing the gray, hollow plastic underneath. It was a perfect metaphor for the woman who had almost broken their family. "No, sweetheart," Eleanor said gently. She dropped the plastic into the compost bin. "That's just something that tried to look like gold. True treasure doesn't peel." She took Leo's hand and Julian's hand, leading them toward the house. The lights were on in the kitchen, and the smell of a slow-cooked roast drifted through the screen door. It was a simple life, a quiet life. Eleanor Sterling looked back at her garden one last time. She had built an empire, survived a predator, and reclaimed her son. She had shown the world that a poor old woman was actually the most powerful person in the room, not because of the money in her bank account, but because of the truth in her heart. The Lioness of Sterling Mines was finally at peace, and for the first time in 68 years, Eleanor Sterling knew exactly where her place was. It was right here, at the head of the table, surrounded by the people who loved her for exactly who she was.